Okay, so here we're going to be covering the main points of the thalamus. And the thalamus is included in the diencephalon, and the diencephalon is actually composed of a number of different structures. It's composed of the metathalamus, epithalamus, subthalamus, hypothalamus, and of course the topic we're going to be discussing, which is the thalamus. Now, the thalami, we have two thalami. It's a paired structure of the diencephalon, and it's located kind of laterally to the. To the lateral wall. It's located on the other side, the opposite sides of the third ventricle. And the third ventricle lies kind of like in the center of our brain, and the thalamus would lie there then. And the third ventricle kind of goes in between the two thalami. So the medial wall of the thalamus is in contact with the lateral wall of the third ventricle. Now, if we talk about the thalamus itself, it's basically a rounded structure it's a rounded mass of grey matter. And it's got an anterior, it's kind of flattened and elongated, and it's got an anterior pole or an anterior tubercle towards the front, and it's got a posterior expanded part known as the pulvinar. Now, we encounter that again when we look at the groups of nuclei that can be found within the thalamus. Now, let's look at the borders of the thalamus, what's found on each border, what's covering the thalamus, what are the different layers or laminae you can find here as well. Now, here you can kind of see, as I explained, the medial wall of the thalamus is situated next to the lateral wall of the third ventricle. Okay, and what else do we need to say? We also need to say that kind of like the different borders. So inferiorly to the thalamus, you have the hypothalamus, and if you look at any cross section or an atlas, you can see the hypothalamic sulcus. The sulcus for hypothalamus, which kind of divides the region which is in the hypothalamus and the region that represents for the thalamus itself. Now, okay, so inferiorly you're going to find the hypothalamus. Now, laterally, this structure here is, I've drawn the internal capsule. So the internal capsule kind of is located laterally, and the questions I could ask now is, what are the structures that are located medially to the internal capsule? And you would say your thalamus as well as your caudate nucleus. In relation to your internal capsule, your thalamus and caudate nucleus are medial. Laterally, you've got your lentiform nucleus, which includes globus pallidus and putamen, and then laterally to the lentiform nucleus, you've got your claustrum. Okay, we've discussed how it's third ventricle, we discussed how it's hypothalamus and internal capsule. Now, the superior border is free, but I want to tell you now that there's actually a covering on the thalamus, which is known as stratum zonale, and that stratum zonale is kind of attached, and stratum zonale, it kind of covers the whole thalamus. Lamina fixa is the one that kind of comes from the top, and lamina fixa is different. Lamina fixa goes laterally, so in the direction of the internal capsule. It goes laterally to meet the caudate nucleus, and however the medial border of lamina fixa is different. So the medial border of lamina fixa is known as tinea thalami, and that's its connection with the choroid plexus or tela choroidea. Now, you have an internal medullary lamina, which is here, and that divides the thalamus into a Y-shaped structure, which divides it into different regions that we can then, base our nuclei groups upon. And you also have, that's the internal medullary lamina. You also have an external medullary lamina on the outside, and lateral to your external medullary lamina, you're going to find your groups of reticular nuclei. Now, these reticular nuclei, they're the only groups of nuclei within the thalamus that do not send projections up to the cerebral cortex. They receive projections from the thalamus, and they actually send projections to the brainstem, but they're the only group, the reticular nuclei. By the way, nothing to do with the reticular formation. These are different. And if I've got that right, and the reticular nuclei are the only groups of nuclei within the thalamus that do not project to the cerebral cortex. Okay, we've talked about that. Now, okay, so there's kind of like, here it is. Your thalamus is like here. Then you've got your caudate nucleus kind of laterally into the top of it. Then you've got your internal capsule. Then you've got your lentiform nucleus, globus pallidus, and putamen. And then you've got your claustrum. And basically, one important thing that you need to know is that the groove between the thalamus, between the caudate, the head of the caudate nucleus basically, and the thalamus, in that groove you're going to find stria terminalis. A quick reminder of what stria terminalis is. Stria terminalis is the efferent fibers that were originating from our amygdaloid body and heading towards the direction of the hypothalamus. Anyway, you just need to know that in the groove between the caudate nucleus and the thalamus, you have your stria terminale, and underneath that you're going to have your thalamus striate vein. So kind of you have stria terminalis, ST, and underneath that you have TS, thalamus striate vein.